Breaking news, Olympus is doing their last product release ever. And it's completely stupid and nobody should buy it. I'm going to tell you exactly why. I'm also going to tell you about the Sony FX6, bigger, more expensive version of the Sony a7S III that just might become my new video camera. But first, a word from our sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace makes websites, and you need a website because your social media is not good enough. Squarespace will allow you to just drag and drop pictures, type a few words about yourself, and instantly have an amazing, beautiful, portable website that works on computers and mobile devices with beautiful statistics and stores. If you're interested in improving your web presence, go to squarespace.com/Tony. No credit card required. Just try it out, see how amazing it is. And after your free trial, use the coupon code Tony to get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace. First up, this Olympus lens, the 150-400 f4.5, has a built-in 1.25 times teleconverter. This sounds a lot like the existing Canon 200-400 millimeter f4 with the 1.4 times teleconverter. And in fact, physically it resembles it so closely. Even the details of that teleconverter switch are nearly identical. The Canon lens is $11,000. The Olympus lens is only $7,500, so that actually sounds like a relative bargain, right? The Canon lens is targeted towards professional sports photographers. 200 to 400 millimeters is a great range for field sports like football, soccer, where you're shooting sort of like the other half of the field, and as well as things like motorsports. The Olympus lens, though, has a different angle of view, and to understand that, you have to understand a little bit about crop factor, because the Canon lens is designed for full-frame cameras, whereas the Olympus lens is designed for micro four thirds cameras with a smaller sensor, a sensor about a quarter of the size. So once you put these into 35 millimeter equivalent terms, the Olympus lens functions as a 300 to 800 millimeter f9 lens. Or when you flip the 1.25 times teleconverter on, it extends the reach from 800 to 1000 millimeters with an equivalent f-stop of f11. You could use it south of 800 millimeters, but you wouldn't want to. You would just turn off the teleconverter unless you needed to be with that extra reach. If this isn't making sense to you, if you aren't familiar with crop factor, if you don't understand the difference between total light and light intensity, or if you've been talking to the photography flat earthers, the crop factor truthers who think you shouldn't apply the crop factor to both the focal length and the f-stop at the same time, go to my educational page at scp.io/crop, where I describe the technical details behind all of that and how that crop factor math should work. So knowing that the lens is equivalent to about 300 to 1000 millimeters, we know it's really too long for most sports. And instead, the only things you might be shooting with it are probably wildlife. It's probably mostly targeted towards wildlife. That makes a lot of sense because Olympus has a lot of loyal wildlife fans. And also, wildlife people will spend a whole lot on a good lens to get some better results. So it doesn't actually compare to the Canon 200 to 400 at all. Instead, we see it comparing to more super telephoto zooms, like the Sony 200 to 600, the Canon RF 100 to 500. And once I compared it to those comparable zooms, it no longer seems like a good value at all. This past couple of weeks, Chelsea and I have been testing both the Sony a7R4 and the Canon R5 with all the best wildlife lenses, and we've been blown away by both of them. They both provide incredibly high megapixel sensors, which allow you to extract the most detail from faraway subjects, which is the realistic wildlife scenario. When you look at the Sony similar lens, it is a full frame 200 to 600 f6.3, whereas the Olympus is 300 to 800 f9. And that means that the Sony in that range from 200 to 600, it's gathering about a stop more light, so you'll get cleaner low light images and more background blur. It also means the Sony can zoom back to 200, so it has a wider range. But it cannot match the Olympus's ability to reach 1000 millimeters until you factor in that the Sony has 60 megapixels in the sensor, whereas the Olympus has only 20. That means you can apply a 1.7 times crop to your A7R files and still get a full 20 megapixels out of it. And that neatly puts you right at about 1000 millimeters with an equivalent f-stop of f11, which means it's almost exactly the same results as you get out of an Olympus EM1 Mark III with the new $7,500 lens. There's one big difference though. The Sony gear will cost you about $5,000 brand new. The Olympus gear will cost you about $9,000. Just the Olympus lens alone costs 50% more than the Sony a7R IV with that lens. The price difference there seems insane for getting similar results, but maybe they don't perform the same. After all, most of the time you get what you pay for, right? Well, Chelsea and I are two of only a handful of professional wildlife photographers who have actually shot with gear from all of these companies. And I can say the Sony a7R IV and Canon R5 greatly outperform any of the Olympus cameras for wildlife scenarios. And if you're Olympus fanatic, this is great news for you because Olympus probably isn't going to be producing any more cameras. So it might be time to jump ship, but instead of buying this lens, you can actually switch systems or keep your existing camera and just buy a new camera and you'll actually save some money, as well as buying into a system that will provide support into the indefinite future. Olympus, as you might recall, is selling everything to a company called JIP, which is mostly known for stripping things down and just kind of making money off of the brand equity. Actually, that's kind of what Olympus is doing now. I think they're overcharging loyal Olympus customers who have been dying for this lens. This lens shouldn't be priced at $7,500. It should be priced $2,500 or so. I like the Sony a7R IV with the 200 to 600. The fact that you can crop so deep without flipping a switch or without putting on a teleconverter because of that high megapixel sensor is amazing. But I actually prefer the Canon R5 because the R5's autofocus system is more sophisticated, it's faster, and whereas the a7R IV is limited to about 8 to 10 frames per second, the R5 will actually get you to 20 real frames per second completely silently with no detectable rolling shutter in our own tests. And for that reason, I'd actually pick the R5 with the 100 to 500 if I needed a zoom. If not, I would probably pick up the 800mm f11, which is even lighter. But this Canon rig is actually lighter than the Olympus rig, and it's cheaper, and it performs vastly, vastly better. So we're at a point in the history of Olympus when I cannot come up with any scenario where anybody should buy this product, even existing Olympus shooters, even people heavily invested in the system would be better off buying a camera body from a different system because of all the extra money they'd have in their pocket. So what is Olympus doing? It's just a last-minute money grab, and I think it's unfortunate because the loyalty that Olympus shooters feel towards their company, it isn't reciprocal. You love them, but they don't necessarily love you. They want that last bit of money out of you before they sell everything to JIP. Up next, let's talk about the Sony FX6. This is a cinema camera, and it's not something we normally cover because we're more focused on stills photography and sort of lighter video. But the FX6 really bridges the gap. It takes the Sony a7S III, which is our main on-the-go video camera outside of the studio, and puts it into a form factor that actually addresses a lot of my big complaints about the Sony a7S III. As you can see from this photo here, it allows you to move the screen forward, farther away. So particularly if you're filming yourself with the screen flipped towards you, that means the screen is going to be bigger and clearer and not blocked by the lens. It also means it would be easier to reach because that screen is touch sensitive, so you can do things like change settings and touch your eye or touch a subject. The grip on the top also has a mic connection, so it moves the mic forward without requiring any additional cables with a true digital audio connection, just like we have on the Sony a7S III, but really superior. And the fact that it's moving the mic another 6 to 8 inches closer would noticeably improve your audio quality. So as a vlogger for a channel with 1.4 million subscribers, the difference in price going from the $3,500 a7S III to the $6,000 FX6 isn't a big deal, but the improvement in practicality and audio quality might just be worth it for me. A rundown on the specs: it's a full-frame video camera capable of recording 422 10-bit video. And what that means is higher quality video, even if you have to do heavy processing. My Sony a7S III is the exact same specs, and the other night we had to shoot in really, really low light, and that required me to raise the brightness in post. and it still looked really beautiful. And I attribute that to the 422 10-bit because it did better than it would have with 420 8-bit, which is the video quality most cameras put out. It shoots at 4K all the way up to 120 frames per second, so you can get beautiful slow motion video, and it doesn't overheat, unlike the Canon R6 and Canon R5. We found the autofocus to be absolutely perfect. It sort of psychically finds the eye in the subject and smoothly shifts from one subject to the next. And if you hook up an external recorder, like an Atomos recorder, it will record raw video out, but it cannot record raw video internally. All these specs are identical between the a7S III and the new FX6. So what are the differences? Well, the a7S III is way cheaper, about half the price. The a7S III also has sensor stabilization, which for some reason the FX6 lacks. That means if you do get the FX6, you'll either be mounting it to a tripod or putting it on a gimbal to add stabilization. There is this sort of software-based stabilization built into the FX6 where it'll record all of your movements, and then you run it through software on your computer later to sort of electronically cancel those out. But for me, I'd rather avoid that extra step. The a7S III also doubles as a stills camera, albeit only a 12 megapixel stills camera. It's not one that I would ever use. And the a7S III is much smaller, quite a bit lighter, but not as light as you might think. The a7S III is 1.35 pounds, whereas the FX6 is 2 pounds. So you're not adding that much more weight to switch to a full cinema camera. The FX6 does offer some distinct advantages, such as 2 XLR inputs, so that sort of big mic input that you might want to use for serious microphones. It also has an SDI out, which is what we use in the studio here. SDI uses a B&C connector like your cable does, which means it's less likely to pull loose than HDMI, and I just greatly prefer it. It's much more reliable. It also has timecode linkage if you're linking up to multiple cameras and you want to keep them perfectly in sync. It has a ton of buttons on it, and that's going to be one of the biggest advantages. If you're in the field shooting run and gun style documentary things, reality TV, you often need to just quickly change the settings without digging through menus like you would have to on the a7S III. So it's easier in that way. The mic and screen can move forward, and the screen can be positioned in multiple different places. It's just more customizable to adjust it to different shooting styles. For example, I found in the a7S III, the screen, when I'm in front of the camera, the screen is always mounted on camera right, but I sometimes want it on the top or the left, and I have those options on the FX6. The FX6 also uses a potentially bigger and expandable battery pack, so you could go with a small light battery or a big heavy battery depending on your power needs, and that means that you might not have to change the battery after like 45 minutes or an hour, which is what we typically get out of the a7S III. I am definitely going to be reviewing the FX6, so be sure to subscribe to see that. And be sure to check out our sponsor, Squarespace. No matter what type of website you need, Squarespace makes it super simple and beautiful. Go to squarespace.com/Tony, set it up for your photography portfolio, for your business, for your own just personal web presence, so you don't have to rely on social media anymore. Once you love it, if you love it, use the coupon code Tony to get 10% off. In the comments down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts on both the new lens and the new Sony camera. I'm sure some of you Olympus people are irritated by my comments, but keep in mind, I don't have any loyalty to any one brand. I've never accepted payments from any camera or lens manufacturer, unlike a lot of the Olympus ambassadors who have defended it so vigorously. I'm on the side of the consumer, and I really just want you to love photography. Thanks so much, and bye.